the Joan Quinn Profiles. As an editor for Andy Warhol's Interview, the Los Angeles Herald-Examiner, LA Style, and Detour magazines, Joan covered the social set, the Hollywood hotshots, the international art scene, the mysteries of food, the excitement of travel, and the fabulous world of fashion. Joan continues to find creative people on the cutting edge who make things happen. Here's Joan Agajanian Quinn.
Hi, I'm Joan Quinn, and welcome to the Joan Quinn Profiles. Waiting to be profiled is poet Annie Reiner and composer Ken Mazur. Poet, painter, writer, Annie Reiner was born in New York and came to California as a teenager, where she went to Beverly Hills High, earned a Bachelor of Arts at UCLA, and a Master's from USC. She practices psychotherapy and has published articles for professional journals. Annie, you come from a family of talented people. Did this drive you to a different profession?
Did it drive me out of the business? I think it's more that something drove me into psychotherapy.
I mean, that's a
psychology.
Career, a heavy-duty career.
But as you know, I also got back into the arts.
But for 20 years, you worked as a professional?
No, I actually, I trained for a long time, and then I worked in a private practice for about 5 years, and then I took time off and just wrote and painted for 10 years.
Because I was wondering what you were doing while you were working, if you were still pursuing the arts.
I started to,
about
the time when I was 30, and I for 10 years, I wrote and I painted plays, poetry, short stories, everything.
So you weren't so much balancing your career and your artistic professions?
Not at that point, but then I went back.
Yes.
I went back. I was sort of drafted back. I had no intention of going back, but I went back, and at that point, I did very much balance, and I'm still balancing. I write and I practice.
You were, when do you have time? How do you do that?
I don't. I'm going crazy, thank you.
Oh, so you need some help?
Yeah. What I try to do is write in the morning at this point. And
then make your appointments in the afternoon?
Yeah.
But you were asked to write for these professional journals. Were they specific subjects? Or?
No, some of mine was asked, and some were just subjects I was interested in, and then I'd write it and submit it to a journal.
I see. You've written a lot of children's books.
Yes, I wrote 4 children's books.
And how did that happen?
That I was asked. The first one, somebody asked me to write a children's book about modern and contemporary art, and because I was a painter.
Oh.
And so that was my first book. So
you've also received awards for the children's work, from audio, some of the audio
there was
work?
An audio tape of one of my children's stories that I wrote, and Sharon Stone narrated it, and it won the children's, what was it called?
Parents.
Parents
Golden.
Parents' Choice or something.
Yeah, Parents' Choice Golden
Award. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yes.
But you also
She did a great job.
Anne
too.
Bancroft had read one of your stories.
She read some of the stories.
And who else? I forget.
Jack Lemmon
read
one of them. Yeah.
That was so great. Was that because of your connections?
No, it was the woman who was casting them. She knew all these people. This was with Dove Audio at the time.
So she was able to get them.
Yeah.
Well, coming from this kind of showbiz family, did you ever act?
No, I never acted.
Did you want to act?
No, I never did.
But your family...
I do a lot of poetry readings, and I'm told that I am an actress, but I don't act.
That's part of the acting. But your mother's a singer.
Yes.
And your father?
He does everything.
Does everything.
Writes and acts, directs.
And your brother?
And my brother is a director and also writes
And he was an
something.
actor?
He's an actor.
But did you ever work
And I have another brother.
Oh, and what does that
And
brother
he
do?
is a wonderful painter.
Is that right?
Very talented painter.
Well,
His
your
name is Lucas.
painting on the set is fabulous.
Oh, thank you.
Picasso.
Picasso is a
and
young man.
this I love.
Oh,
it's
thank you.
so, I don't know, floaty and
Yeah.
and
Well, these were more. I also did the cover of my last poetry book, and they're more. There's a more poetic feel about them.
yeah, I love it. I think this one too, which is the book we're talking about.
Yes.
You're going to read from it very shortly. But I wanted to know what kind of short stories you've written.
They're very quirky humor. They're funny, but there's a kind of psychological inquiry to them and psychological depth to them. But they're kind of nutty, funny stories.
And the plays that have been on?
The plays have also been funny but serious.
One in Chicago? Is
One
that
in
when
Chicago
you
I did last summer called The Family Gold, and Harold Gould played the father in it, and he was wonderful.
did you direct it?
No, I didn't
You
direct
wrote it, but and then you sit back. How does it feel when
It's,
somebody's
well,
directing it and someone's acting your words?
hopefully you have a good relationship with the director, which I have in both plays that I've
I
had
see.
produced, and then you have a voice in what's happening, and it's a collaboration.
Yeah, that's what I wondered. But your great love, aside from painting and writing, is poetry, I think.
How do you know that?
Well, because I feel like you call yourself a poet.
Uh-huh.
And when I was reading your poetry, to me, poetry is the most difficult thing to write.
Yeah.
I think it's hard to understand. I think
Yes,
it's hard
it
to
is.
write. And I don't know. I think
Well,
you have to have a real love for it.
Yeah, in a way, it's so close to the bone, poetry.
Is that why?
That I think if you write poetry, you do consider yourself a poet, first and foremost.
You've gotten awards for your poetry as well. And one of the things that I didn't understand is if you have to take classes to be a poet.
I didn't. A lot of people do.
You didn't take classes?
Well, I took very little, let's put it that way. I think I
Really?
was in a workshop for a very short amount of time. For me, all of my writing comes out of something very deep that sort of bubbles up. And what I find is that it takes its own form. And form is usually the thing form technique is what you learn.
That's what's so hard.
Yeah.
To know, and
Except
poetry doesn't rhyme, doesn't have to rhyme.
Doesn't have to.
No,
Yeah.
and you were talking about your influences. Humpty Dumpty was one of the things you're going to read
Yes.
for me.
You want me to read that one?
Sure, I do.
Okay. This is from my latest book, which is called Beyond Rhyme and Reason.
And I have this here, so while you're looking for Humpty Dumpty, we can see that.
Yes, and I'll just give you a little preface to this.
Okay, great.
Every time I read this poem, I think of a poem that I once heard John Ashbery read. And he was talking about the process of writing poetry and the fact that you feel, when you're about to write a poem, you feel your mind is sort of confused, and poetry is not linear, and you get in this state of mind where he put it that you feel like you're falling to pieces. And the line in the poem was, the line in his poem was, and then at some point the pieces sit up and write.
That's beautiful.
So it feels as if it just comes out of that. So that's has something to do with this poem. It's called Humpty Dumpty Had a Great Fall. Humpty Dumpty didn't realize that to fall to pieces is to write a poem whose words, like dreams, don't know what they're saying, they're just dancing, and those who learn to dance understand them. After the fall, Humpty Dumpty became a great poet, but none of the king's horses and none of the king's men ever understood his work. He died a broken egg, unappreciated in his lifetime, but later discovered in a rare and used bookstore when his book of poems fell off the shelf and hit me in the head. I was concussed and rushed to the hospital. When I awoke, the book was there beside my bed. So I read it and was so moved, I fell to pieces.
That is so great. But just telling the story before made it so much more meaningful for me.
Because when I read it, thing about poetry is it sometimes.
So when you go to poetry readings, do you always talk about the influences and why?
I do. I tend to. Yeah. I actually once had someone in the audience who said, "Don't talk about it. Just read the poems."
No, but it's really important because the other one you're going to read is about your parents' 50th wedding anniversary.
Yes.
And it's Carl and Estelle Reiner.
Yes, and. It was their 50th. It's now long gone. They're now
Did you read
past
this at
the
a party for
yes,
them? Oh, you did.
They had a big party, and I read this poem for them. It's called, well, the only thing you need to know about this is there's a great love of soup in our family.
Oh.
And so this poem is called Recipe for Life. There is no revenge against parents. Try as you might to get back at them for their well-intentioned mistakes is to get back at yourself. You are they, and they are always you. You are the soup into which they threw the onions of their tears, the noodles of their parents, and the chicken of their fears. It's a diet you never could quite understand, a thick soup full of fat, but somehow delicious. For in the steam that rises and dissipates in thin air is love. In the steam, ethereal, invisible heat is love. Breathe this. Leave the rest behind, and you will carry them weightless in your mind. The body they gave you, you cannot give back. Even God doesn't want it when you're done. The body is the potatoes, the carrots, the chariot of your dreams, but the dreams themselves are in the steam, in the heat, in the love that no one sees you eat, but this you can give back.
That's so beautiful. Talking about food, because from love to food, you knew you were a poet because of the honey that came from the bees. What was that?
Oh,
that
yes.
was so beautiful.
That was a
what
prose
was that?
poem that I wrote. Yeah. Well, how do you know you're a poet?
The feeling of that you
said. It's the feeling of somehow that you're home, that suddenly, you're writing, you're in the middle of this process, and you feel a perfect freedom, and you feel at home.
Well, you brought it all home for us today. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks, Annie. And thanks for watching this part of the show. We'll be right back with Ken Mazur. I know. Hi, I'm Joan Quinn, and welcome back to the Joan Quinn Profiles. Composer, lyricist, Ken Mazur was born and raised in New York City. He's recorded over 50 albums as a studio guitarist with such greats as Tina Turner, Marvin Gaye, and Robert Palmer, with whom he toured. He's worked on Broadway with Twyla Tharp and Gotta Go Disco, which I saw. I loved it. Yes,
you actually saw it.
I actually saw it.
Amazing.
And Ken, you have this big, lavish musical career, and yet you went to the University of Colorado and majored in archaeology.
Archaeology, yes.
What was that all about?
Well, I began my musical career very young. I started playing when I was about 10, and by the time I was 13, I was working. And I was writing songs by about 14, and really very dedicated for a teenager, I think. And my band became the house band at the Village Gate in New York City, and I was down. And I was there all the time. I was constantly in the Village and playing. And then I think I woke up one morning when I was about 19, and I said, I've never done anything else in my life other than this.
The music, you mean?
The music. It was always been music.
Was there music in your family?
Oddly enough, no. But my mom had my sister, my brother, and I singing in the car from my earliest memories. In fact, I can recall by the age of 6 or 7, doing songs like "You Are My Sunshine" in 3-part harmony.
Well, me too, but I can't do anything. I can't sing, right? I mean, you really used that as part of your career building.
Yes, I have to say that, and the fact that my parents constantly had classical music on in the environment in the house. I mean, from my earliest memories, I remember listening to Beethoven and Brahms and Stravinsky.
Well, that was the other thing. You said you pronounced your name Mazur, but I
Mazur.
wondered if you were related to the conductor Ken Mazur.
No, not that I know
No,
of.
you do?
No, I'm
Oh,
not.
dear.
Just another Mazur or Mazur.
Or Mazur or Mazur.
My trip to Colorado, I just realized that perhaps I needed to go to a different part of the country other than the New York metropolitan area and see something else of the United States. So I had long liked anthropology, archaeology. It always fascinated me. My brother had been a sociology major at school, and he brought home all his books, and I just read them. I just started reading all his books. So I realized, well, why don't I just do that for a while and see if I like it. So I went out to Colorado and ended up working at Mesa Verde National Park Research Center and as an archaeologist, and on a dig in Mancos Canyon. And,
You're kidding. Were you writing music at that time?
I was still writing. In my early days, in my teens and my early 20s, I was working in bands and as a songwriter. I was not a composer. I really was a lyricist, songwriter. And you could, of course, continue to do that when you're in college, but I wasn't really playing in bands. I worked really hard at my schooling and began to study jazz on the side because I'd always wanted to study jazz. I had been a young rock and roller, you know. So I went to Denver and started studying with a famous jazz player named Dale Bruning and learned to read and write music. And
You had never done that before?
I couldn't read and write until I was in my 20s.
Really?
Until I was in my 20s. And I took it very seriously. And upon graduating from college, I realized I was a bit too deep by the bug. I had to go back to music. There was no way I could spend the rest of my life in a university environment being an anthropologist. It just was, it was wonderful. It was very exciting. You know, this is Raiders of the Lost Ark and all that. But it wasn't really for me. So I set my sights on going to New York and becoming a session musician. And
do you have to be really an expert?
You have to be a very, very proficient player to do studio work, because you walk in the studio and you sit down and they put the music on your stand and you might run it through one time and then you're making a record. This is not like a band that rehearses, you know,
Right,
and you're
yeah.
hanging out together, and
That's what I
there's
wondered.
none of that. It's totally on the spot, a red light goes on, and there you go. And the level of musicianship is so wonderful in New York. I have to say, my years as a session player, I was privileged to play with the most astounding and wonderful people. And I also was in an era, it was the last era of session players before the computers hit.
But you were playing with these people who you thought were so extraordinary, and we don't know their names. They weren't famous people, were they?
And they're still
were
not. And they're still not famous.
Yeah, and they're good, but they're good.
They were good players, and we all knew each other, and there was a wonderful society because there was no drum machines or computers in the studio in those days. You went in and there was a drum set up, and there was a couple guitar rigs set up for you, and a bass player, and a conga player would be there, and a piano player, and every day was a live session with players.
So from the studios, did you make a lot of connections so that you got your stage work and that you were writing for TV?
Yes, actually,
Yes?
the way it worked for me was, you know, all these players, we all knew each other, and we'd go and play at the clubs in New York City. And one night I went to visit a friend of mine playing at a small club in Greenwich Village, and he came off the stage and he went over to me and goes, "Would you like to go on tour?" And I hadn't done any tour work. I had managed to establish myself in New York as a session player. I hadn't done any touring. And I said, well, what kind of music and with who? And he goes, "It's really great rock and roll with Robert Palmer." And it just so happens that Robert Palmer was like my favorite in college. I just loved his stuff. And I didn't know what to say at first.
Astounded.
I was astounded. And so they had me over to a big sound stage, and I played, and Robert liked it, and off I went. And I ended up doing 3 albums with Robert and touring the world and playing in London and Hamburg and Berlin and you name it.
Fabulous.
It was so much fun.
And then how'd you get to Twyla Tharp?
As a session player, I think Twyla Tharp, it was the same conductor perhaps who had done Gotta Go Disco. And all these session musicians, you know, we were, interestingly enough, in Gotta Go Disco, I don't know if you remember, we were all on stage. The whole band.
That's what I was going to say. With Twyla, were you on stage too in a corner?
No, I was actually in the pit.
In the pit.
I was in the pit orchestra, and she's an amazing. She was so amazing.
I know,
What a taskmaster. She worked us. We worked very hard.
Yeah, she's
really hard.
very serious.
Very serious. John Simon was the musical director on that. He was the producer who worked with the group The Band for a long time.
Oh, yeah.
And the music that we did for that was very much like that. It was very Woodstocky.
So you played Gotta Go Disco for how long?
For as long as it ran. And
Which was what?
Which was only a couple months, because they made the mistake of
Who
opening.
wrote it? I forgot.
Kenny Lehman was one of the writers. Irene Cara was the star,
Oh,
of
that's
course,
right,
of Disco
Irene,
Time.
right, exactly.
And they had this gigantic plexiglass riser, and the rhythm section was on the bottom, and then you had the horn players above us, and you could look straight up, and you see all the way through to the top, and then there were the string players all the way up top. And we all had headphones, and it was high tech. The dancers would come down this plexiglass thing, and all the lights would go off. It was pretty much fun, but it wasn't a very legit Broadway thing, and the critics didn't like it, unfortunately.
But maybe it was the timing.
Yes.
You have also written music for TV.
Yes, since I came to LA, I've been doing television work, and it started before I did that in New York. After moving away from session work, I began to write jingles, and I did that
commercials,
for 3 or 4 years. I did that, and
do you have an agent who gets you those?
I have always just sort of floated along on my own, and my jingle work was very exciting. Big time studios and high-profile clients like Chevrolet and McDonald's and stuff like that. It was a lot of fun. But you do that for a while, and if you grow up writing songs, full-length songs and lyrics and deeper music, you wake up one day and you go, wait a minute, I'm writing 28.5 seconds of a cat food commercial. I think there's something more I want to do. And so...
So then you went on to get an award for documentary Voices in the Attic.
Yes.
You were nominated at Cannes for Cat and Moose.
Yes.
What is that?
That was a short starring Margaret Whitten. It was very cute. It's about a cat, and the cat doesn't want his owner, who's a guy, to hook up with this woman. So he does everything he can to foil this
So you
whole
wrote
thing.
all the music?
So I wrote the music for that, which was, we did sort of a Mozartian opera for that.
Wow.
It was operatic sounding.
Ooh,
But it was
sounds
more
great.
like the overture,
So was that the step into Precious Piglet? Was it?
The step in the Precious Piglet was my 3-year-old.
Oh,
Jamie.
I see.
I have a 3-year-old son named Jamie, and my wife opened up a small club in Topanga that does continuing classes for children and things like that. She said, would you come in and do a singing class for children? And I said, oh, okay, all right, why not? I'll try it. I had never done this before. And it was really wonderful. I mean, I really enjoyed the feedback from the children. And then one day, a woman approached me who had written this book, Precious Piglet. She'd written the screenplay book for it. And she said, would you like to turn this into a musical for me? And I had never done this before. I had never done musical theater as a composer, as a player, right? I'd been on stage. And I said, well, let's give it a try. And so I wrote the songs and went out of my way to make it so that it was music that the adults would like as well as the children, which is, I think, a very important thing.
So how long did it take you to do that?
It took about a month to compose the entire...
That's all?
That's it, yes.
Oh, I thought you were going to say
no,
years.
Honestly, the hardest part of it for me was coming back to being a lyricist, because as a composer for television, it's very unusual that you write lyrics. And this, of course, is...
But you wrote lyrics and you wrote the music.
And,
I see. So with TV, you were just writing the music.
Just the music. I have a show that runs...
composing.
Yes, I have a show that runs now called Biker Build-Off. And it's the opposite of this. This is a nice kids' music with messages, and Biker Build-Off is heavy metal. It's literally hardcore heavy metal.
And Precious Piglets is a play that is on Saturday mornings for children?
It's on Saturday mornings at 11 a.m. at the Whitefire Theater in Sherman Oaks. And we put on the play.
It just runs and runs and runs.
We're going to run it as long as we keep getting the crowds we're getting. And the children love it. They come down at the end of the show. They come down, and all this cast is all there.
Do you act in it at all?
Without giving away the store, I am the puppeteer. And the background vocals are being sung by crows that are in a row on a fence.
So you're there every Saturday
I'm there every
morning?
Saturday doing it.
Do you love it?
I have to tell you, I haven't been in a group of people like this in a long time, because as a composer, you're in your own world, in the studio, and you're working, and I hire musicians, they come in, they work with me, and then you put it out there on television, but you never see the reaction of people to your thing.
Oh, so that's a different thing
for you. It's a
for
whole world, and here, I go on Saturday morning, and the kids are just you know, they're
Do you
clapping and
take your
cheering.
child? Do you take Jamie with you?
He's the mascot. He goes every
He
single
goes-
week. He goes every single
Does
week.
he know it all by
He wants to put in his own version of the show with his 3-year-old friends, and he's already casting it with the children in town.
That's so
which is
great.
so wonderful.
So, had you taught children before? Had you ever done anything like that before?
The only teaching I had done before was in college. I taught private lessons, guitar lessons, and I had a number of children, and that stayed with me for years as a teacher, and I found that very rewarding. But watching Jamie, you know, he'd come into the studio while I was writing these tunes, and you could tell whether they were a hit with him or not.
I was going to say,
right away.
you had a built-in critic, right?
I had a built-in test market audience for this thing. And we put it on in the car. I'd put it on with my voice before I got these wonderful actors and actresses to do it. And within a couple days, he was insisting that I play it over and over again. And I thought, well, maybe this has got something here.
Oh, I'm going to play this. I haven't played it. I'm going to play it in the car on the way home.
Oh, please do.
And
Please do.
thank you,
Well, thank
Ken
you.
Mazur, so much for coming in today.
Thank you for having me.
We really enjoyed it. And you, our audience, thank you for watching, and keep writing to 777 South Figueroa, 44th floor, Los Angeles 90017. And we'll see you next time on the Joan Quinn.